Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited for this jamming workshop that we have, and I'm Shirley and I work for Rethink Waste, and we're hosting this workshop in collaboration with the Master Food Preservers as part of our Rethink Recycling Days event, where we're hosting many different workshops that are happening today and next Saturday. As I mentioned, this workshop is being presented by the Master Food Preservers program, and we've had the opportunity to work with them at our in-person events in the past, and happy to work with them again for this virtual event for you all. The Master Food Preservers program is a program through the University of California's Agriculture and Natural Resources Department, and all the UC Master Food Preservers are trained volunteers who extend UC research-based information about home food safety and preservation to the public. They work in the community as local food preservation specialists, teach classes on various food preservation topics, and answer food preservation questions by email and much more. Today, we are going to be learning from Denise Phillips, Anna Lee, and Jessica Lee. And to give you a little bit of background on them, I'm going to start with Denise. Denise is originally from St. Louis and graduated from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and then lived in Philadelphia for 6 years before heading west to California with her husband. They've lived in the San Mateo County coast for nearly 30 years, where they raised their 2 children, now both seniors at the University of Michigan. She has been an active community volunteer, working especially closely with the HEAL Project, an environmental education nonprofit that teaches kids about where their food comes from and why that matters. She loves to cook and eat and to share that passion with others as a Master Food Preservers. Next, we have Anna, who is a PhD student in the Emmett Interdisciplinary Program in Environment and Resources. She is a master composter for San Mateo County and holds an advanced certificate in ecological horticulture from the Center of Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems at UC Santa Cruz, and has a master's in agroecology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She also likes to trail run and make music with friends and nonsense. And last but not least, we have Jessica, who is a microbiologist in space biosciences at the NASA Ames Research Center. She has a PhD in environmental microbiology from Stanford and generally works with microbes in the environment, on plants, and in test tubes. But she also likes to have fun with them in the kitchen, for instance, in sourdough and fermented pickles. She loves to talk with people about science and has been a Master Food Preserver since 2018. So thank you, Jessica, Anna, and Denise for joining us today and being able to put on this workshop for us. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to them so that they're able to share everything that they've prepared.
Yeah. Denise, are you able to run our first survey question? We are curious from everyone in the audience just to find out where you're coming from in terms of jam. And while you're answering that survey, maybe Denise, if you could go to the next slide, and while everyone's answering, I could chat just a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we'll give you just a little bit more background on the Master Food Preservers. We're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about food waste, both at the beginning and end of the presentation, because that is actually what brings us here to the Rethink Recycling Days. And it ties in with a lot of our other messages, for instance, about food safety. And we'll give you some background on some of the basics of food preservation, why jams are preserved. And we'll, in the middle, we'll walk you through 2 different recipes, which are easy. These are, if you've never done any jams or jellies before, these are great ways to start out. On the other hand, if you're totally experienced, we're thinking maybe you haven't tried these before because they're a little bit out of the ordinary. So we're going to do a freezer apple butter and a red wine jelly. And you may have noticed that the word jam is not in either of these 2. And so actually what we're going to talk to you today about is the larger family of fruit spreads, which includes jams, jellies, fruit butters, et cetera, et cetera. And I should mention, so as Shirley said, we have chat open for you to answer questions at any time. So Anna and I are going to be going pretty fast and glossing over sort of a lot of things. So if you have questions about any details and you want us to get deeper, ask questions please in the chat and we will make sure we get them addressed. And also, a lot of the resources that we're mentioning today will be made available to you at the end. We're going to have a survey that we want you to fill out, and when you do that, you'll give us your email address and we will send you the recipes and the resources that we covered today. All right, so who are the master food preservers and why should
Actually,
you listen to us?
let's
Yes.
end the poll.
Oh,
Should
I'm
we see the
sorry.
results?
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm ending the poll. Last chance to answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Great.
Let me share the results.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, so we do have a majority of experienced, with some experience, jam and jelly makers, but some of you have never made them before. So we hope that you'll go home and try one of our recipes after this.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so master food preservers, as Shirley mentioned, we fall within the University of California system, and we work on a countywide basis. So our little organization serves San Mateo and San Francisco counties. Next slide, please. Probably the most important thing that you need to know about us is that everything that we teach is based on science. And so all of the recipes that we teach have been tested in a lab with things like, temperature probes and instruments for measuring water availability and things like that. So you can know that when we teach you something, it'll be based in evidence, and that a lot of our emphasis on food safety is really based on that evidence. And so that's one of the things that makes us slightly different from maybe a lot of other jam and jelly workshops that you might attend. Also, the recipes, we have sources for what we call approved recipes, which are those that our organization approves of as being like safe. So we have an emphasis on food safety. And the recipes that we're going to be teaching you today come from, as you can see on this picture and right here, this is a book put out by the Ball Preserving Company that is recommended by our program. Okay, and I'll leave it to Anna now to talk about some food waste issues.
Yeah, so we wanted to contextualize this in this, like, where does food preservation fit in the food waste problem in the US, or actually on the global scale. So we want to start with maybe Denise can launch this poll. We just want to get a sense of what your guesses are about what % of waste discarded by Americans is food. So we'll give you a couple minutes to respond to that. Wow, you all are quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're thinking about landfills. If you think about if you went to a landfill and just took like a sample of what all is there, what % of that is food waste? And it looks like we've got actually quite a few responses. Let's give it another maybe 5 seconds and then we can close it.
Ready for the results?
Nice. So we have a lot in the kind of 20 to 40%, and some people guessed a lot more. We can go to the next slide. This will give us an answer. So food waste makes up about 20% of our landfill space in the US. So you think about that's like a fifth. And that's problematic for a couple of reasons. If we can see a couple other pictures if we advance on this slide. So it's problematic for kind of the basic reason of when we create waste, we have to have a place to put it. And land is a finite resource, and we're taking up a lot of it with our food waste. So if we could kind of begin to chip away at the food waste problem, we would need less landfill space. The other thing that I think people forget to think about is that we're also contributing, that food waste in landfills is contributing to the greenhouse gas problem and global climate change. As food decomposes in a landfill situation, it's different from composting at home. So composting at home, if you're familiar with it, probably a bunch of you practice it even, you're doing it with a lot of air involved, and you get microbes recycling those nutrients back into the soil, and also maybe breathing out a little bit of carbon dioxide as they do it. When it happens in a landfill, it happens without oxygen. It happens with different microbes that instead of breathing out oxygen, instead of exhaling CO2, they're kind of burping methane, which some of you may know is a really potent greenhouse gas, even more so than CO2. So landfills are actually the third biggest source of anthropogenic methane that we are producing as humans. So we blame the cows. The cows are definitely part of it, but also our landfill, sending food waste to landfills is also a big source of global climate change. And so that's just the US. I wanted to step back and think about food waste on a global scale. So maybe we can go to the next slide for a couple of numbers. So the first one is 1.8 billion tons of food. Our global community is wasting 1.8 billion tons of food every year. And that's my mind is like, oh, it's a huge number. I have no idea what that is. So another way to frame it is that's 1/3 of what we produce. So if you think about farmers going out and cultivating their land, irrigating, fertilizing, maybe even providing some, producing some pesticides or herbicides, doing all of that work, 1/3 more than we actually need to. And that's problematic, not just because that's work that they're doing that's going to waste, but because in the process of doing that, we are, and this is the next bullet on there, we're producing more greenhouse gases. So every tractor pass is burning fossil fuels. And every time we're transporting something from here to there to help grow our food is producing those greenhouse gases. And so that turns out to be 3.6 billion tons of CO2 that we're producing to grow food that we're not using. And for context, again, that's another one of these big numbers where it's like, what is that? What does that even mean? That's more than India and China combined in a year. So this is a huge source of greenhouse gases that we're just producing for no reason, essentially. And then, of course, it's also a huge economic loss. That's $750 billion worth of value that we've produced that goes to waste. And then also, especially pertinent, I think, for Californians like us, that's 250 cubic kilometers of water that we're using, fresh water. That's an increasingly scarce resource that we're using to produce food that, again, we're not using. So food waste is a huge environmental issue as well as economic and social. But now that I've given you the downer, maybe some empowering thoughts about this. In the developed world, so that waste happens, that 1.8 billion tons of waste happens all along the food chain. So some of it happens at the farm, some of it happens in processing, some of it happens in transportation, refrigeration, and at the supermarket even. But a big chunk of it in the developed world is happening in the household, at the household level. So after that food has gotten to our houses. And that can be challenging because it feels like, oh gosh, we're responsible for so much waste. But with responsibility comes agency. We also have the ability to change some of that. So to change some of our habits and waste less. And so this image is from an ethnographic study that looked at where waste is happening in the households. And they found that actually a lot of the waste that's happening is preventable. It's mostly because we didn't use our food in time. We just let it sit in the back of the fridge or forgot to use it, or our apples rotted rather than us getting to use them. So that speaks to a lot of, maybe it's empowering for us, I hope, that we can, with a few changes to our personal habits, we can begin to chip away at this food waste problem. So we can go to the next slide and think about some of those strategies. Today's workshop is about one particular strategy, but we wanted to contextualize it within some other things, other habits that we can take on. So the first one is one that probably we all try to do, and we can always just use a reminder to do it a little bit more. That's plan and shop with a list, so that you're not bringing food into your home in the first place. Like if you don't have it in your home, you don't have to worry about whether it's going to waste or whether you're using it. So decreasing the demand and not buying more than we need in the first place. And then take care in storage. This is a thing we can always use a reminder for, which things are best kept in the fridge, which things are best kept in the pantries. That can prolong our shelf life of our foods if we do this well. Denise is going to just kind of flip through some of these slides. They come from a really cool infographic from Seattle Public Utilities that you can print it out. We'll send you, actually, if you do our survey, we'll send you the link to this at the end, so you can print it out for yourself and have it handy. But it just is a quick guide to like, oh, where should I be keeping my thing? What should go in the crisper drawer and what should be in the pantry? It's just a good reminder for all of us. So that exists. We're not going to go into great detail, but just wanted to kind of gesture toward that as another resource for you all. And then lastly, so you can plan, shop with a list, you can take care in your storage, and then also you can preserve what you have. Master food preservers have, we do a lot with jam and jelly. That's a really popular topic, but we also do workshops and have a lot of resources related to other ways to preserve food. So things like dehydration, fermentation, freezing, smoking, you name it. We love that kind of stuff. So if you follow us on social media or get on our mailing list, you'll be apprised of all of those upcoming workshops. And also if you take our survey, you can give us feedback about other things that you're particularly interested in learning more about. But so today we want to talk about foods, jams, jellies, and fruit spreads. So I think I'll turn it over to Jessica. Maybe we'll actually pause for a minute and see if there are questions on any of this food waste that we've talked about, and then let Jessica take on preservation.
And I'll just jump in and say that all of that information about how to get on our mailing list will be at the end of the presentation as well.
Yeah, thanks, Denise.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like I'm not seeing any questions pop up.
Yeah, I don't see any questions yet either.
Okay. So feel free though, please be interactive. But for now, I'll just take it away. Next slide, please. Oh yeah.
Oh, I forgot. I forgot we had this new slide. So yeah, this was just a reminder to talk about that we were talking about this whole range of fruit spreads under which many different things fall. So jams, jellies, marmalades, the whole thing. And we're just going to today talk about, Jessica's going to talk about a freezer butter, and I'm going to talk about a jelly.
Oops, sorry, my bad.
Oh, that's okay.
That's
okay.
I think people had time to appreciate.
Okay, good.
We'll let Jessica go.
Okay.
Okay, so Jessica, you're spotlighted. You should
Thank
be.
you.
Okay.
How does food preservation work? Well, as Anna mentioned, a lot of the preventable food waste in our kitchens has to do with spoilage, right? Like you just don't get around to eating something before it goes bad. So it's a matter of time, right? And often we are fighting against microbes so that we can consume the food before they get to it. And when we learn to be master food preservers, a lot of our learning is based on some 6 basic concepts in food preservation that we take into account in order to sort of win the race against microbes. I'm not gonna go through all of them at once, but I did want to put them all up here. And the first recipe that we're going to use actually is a very simple and straightforward one and uses only one of these main concepts in food preservation, and that is temperature. Yes, so our first recipe is going to be what's called a freezer jam, and it's called that because you need to keep it either in the freezer or the fridge for it to be considered preserved. We don't use any of the other methods that I'll talk about later. But for now, just know that cold temperatures slow down microbial growth. They don't kill microbes. So putting something in the freezer is not going to sterilize it, but it will definitely halt any microbial activity. So it gives you more time to enjoy your product. And this freezer butter that I'm about to show you, we say refrigerated for 3 weeks or freeze for up to a year. Okay, so here's the recipe. And actually, if you could spotlight now my phone, please.
Yep, I'm going to stop sharing this screen so that I can go to her phone.
Okay, and we'll give you the full-on recipe at the end if you fill out a survey. So this is going to be what's called an apple pear butter, and generally apple pear butters are the traditional kind. You stir on the stove you stir apples and pears on the stove for a long time, and the way they become spreadable and thick is essentially just evaporating away a lot of water. This is a version of that is much quicker. You're not cooking for very long, so it's kind of cheating. But what's a nice thing is it's easy, but also it preserves a lot of the fresh fruit of the fruits, fresh flavor of the fruits. And what is key to this recipe actually is a special kind of pectin. So we make it thick by using this special kind of pectin. It's not your typical pectin. It's called freezer pectin. Here I'm using the Ball brand, but it's known as freezer pectin or instant pectin, and you can actually stir this into a fruit puree, and you don't even need to cook it to make it set. And so don't try this at home with sort of a normal pectin. I mean, there are recipes for freezer butters using normal pectin. This is not one of them. This is a super easy one, but this kind of product is a special one that will make it work for you. So we start our recipe with apples and pears, and I think I should speak just a little bit to, again, on the topic of food waste. So you often hear people saying, well, that preserves are a great way to use up fruit that's kind of on its way out, right? So a couple things on that. Number one is that if your fruit is already being inhabited by microbes, if it's moldy or fermenty or whatever, that is not a good kind of fruit to use in your preserves because it is already not it's already microbial, and you're not going to save it by using it in jam. In fact, you really should use high quality fruit for your jam. Now, high quality doesn't though mean super beautiful, right? So if you have some aesthetically challenged pears or apples, especially ones with bruises, or if they have some scratches on them, and if they're not as beautiful as you would like to put in your fruit bowl or like put onto a very, very fancy tart, you can cut out bruises, you can cut out those kinds of physical defects, and that is a perfect kind of fruit to use in this kind of recipe. So I'm not going to go through all of the steps, but I can say that what we did was we peeled these apples and pears. I should just also mention, apple and pear peels are edible. So they're on that possibly edible category of food that often gets wasted. I encourage snacking on them while you're cooking dinner. If you look online, there are tons of recipes for like incorporating them into smoothies or salads. Or if you're if you're really into making jam, you can actually try making your own homemade pectin out of apple and pear peels and cores. And so I would encourage you to look at those recipes if you want to use otherwise wastable source. Okay, so we peeled our apples and pears, and we cooked them just long enough, about 5 minutes, so that we could then mash it with a potato masher. So then we're left with some puree, essentially an apple pear applesauce. And so we're going to put, before we do that, I should say, our other ingredients consist of granulated sugar, brown sugar. This is the pectin that comes from this jar. So I've pre-measured everything, and some spices. The pectin may look like a lot of pectin, and in fact, in the recipe that's in our book, it gives it only in it says 1 packet. So when we send you the recipe, we'll give it to you in volume, amounts of volume, so that you don't see in case you want to use it straight out of the jar. Okay, so I'm going to mix together first sugar, the pectin, and the spices, and it helps to pre-mix these just to get them sort of well distributed. It helps prevent having lumps of either pectin or spices in your butter.
Hey, Jessica.
And all we need to do is stir in the puree and the brown sugar. And
so Jessica?
Yes.
While you're stirring, there is a question that just came in that's about pectin. Daniel asks if pectin is plant-based. Do you want to talk about that while you're stirring?
Indeed, pectin is plant-based. I have used it in recipes that called for gelatin in order to use a plant-based gelling agent. So it comes from, a lot of the stuff you buy in store comes originally from orange peels. Again, it's rich in a lot of fruits and their peels especially. And it is it's a polysaccharide, chemically speaking. It's a lot like starch, right? So it's it works very similarly to the way that cornstarch does. But well, Anna will talk a little bit more about sort of the how it works in boiled jellies. But yeah, it's a plant-based gelling agent. And so for this particular fancy freezer pectin, one thing you can't skimp on is to stir for 3 minutes, because that helps make it all the chemicals sort of work together, and then it's set eventually. And I won't show you guys the boring part, so you can take this and you can pour it into jars, glass or plastic, and then just stick it in your fridge. And I can show you that this is a batch that I made a little over a week ago, and set pretty well, right? So now you have a spreadable. It was that really soupy, saucy thing, but now it's spreadable and it tastes like apple pie. And that's a very easy apple butter.
I think you have another question about, is this okay to do without sugar?
Thank you. I was just typing the answer. Go for it.
Oh,
yeah. So
no, that's perfect.
One of the chemical issues about pectin is that it does require interaction with sugar. It's a matter of like the sugar and water and pectin balance in order to gel. So there are going to be a lot of recipes where the amount of sugar is actually key. But that said, there are special pectins out there that don't require as much sugar to gel. And so if you're making a traditional boiled jelly, you can go and look for something called low sugar pectin or low methoxyl pectin that uses a different method to gel, and so doesn't require that much sugar. And that's the kind of pectin that's often used in low sugar or no sugar added jams and jellies. You can sort of finagle a way to use that for a freezer jelly also, but you would have to boil it first. You can't just dump it in like this one. Yeah.
And there are also some apple and pear butter recipes that don't use pectin at all, that just base the texture off of the boiling off of water. So those ones will be a little less dependent on sugar. And of course, if you're just going right into your fridge, then you're depending on the fridge to preserve it, and you don't have to worry about the sugar.
Right, it's preserved. That's true. All right.
All right. Should I go back to the slides?
I think so. Yeah. And if there are any other questions, keep them coming. But I think now I should talk about preserving concepts in more traditional jams and jellies, right? I think that's what we have up next. And then Anna will give you the spiel on the wine jelly.
Oops, hold on. Bear with me.
No problem.
We'll go to that. Nope. All right.
Keep stirring.
Yeah. Keep stirring.
Call attention to the label that Jessica put on her jar. She's got the contents and the date. That's always important to do. And I always feel like, oh no, I'll remember. You won't remember. Just make sure you label it for your future self. It's good to know because most of our preservatives, as Jessica mentioned, this can be in the freezer for a year. So then when you're pulling it out, you can check that date against when you expect it to be expired.
Okay. I'm back.
Great.
Yay.
Sorry. It disappeared. I had to go back and find it.
Okay. And you can,
Next screen?
yes, next screen, please.
Okay.
I think
Oh, your sound is working.
you can spotlight me again, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Did I just turn your phone off now?
Yeah, you can just make it leave.
Okay.
If you want
All
to.
right. So I'll spotlight you.
In the meantime, great. Thank you. So going back to sort of more traditional jams and jellies, which we make on the stove and which we want to keep at room temperature, like that's a great thing is you can keep them in a jar on your cabinet. How does that work? So here we're going to other aspects here. So for temperature, in this case, for shelf-stable jellies, we'll use temperature on the other end of the scale where we boil. And the hot temperatures, when we're processing our jams before we get to store them, hot temperatures in a boiling water bath are used to kill the microbes, any microbes that are in the jelly or jam. So that's using heat before you're making it shelf stable. We also use acid, and that is because at high acid levels or low pH, below pH 4.6, prevents that kind of environment prevents the growth of a lot of microbes that would otherwise make you sick, especially the microbe that causes botulism, which is a big risk actually in canned foods. So acid is important. And we use sugar also. And you may think of jams and jellies as moist kind of products, but if you go down to the level at which microbial cells live, the sugar that's in the jams and jellies actually locks up a lot of the water chemically, making it unavailable for microbial cells to use. So essentially by adding sugar to jams and jellies, you're taking away moisture, and that makes it much harder for microbes to grow. And so that's sugar in a lot of these jams and jellies is preservative. And as you've heard, we have ways of getting around that, but often a lot of the traditional recipes you'll see have lots of sugar, and it's not just to make them sweet, it's a preservative. And then lastly, another function of the boiling water bath is actually you're not just killing microbes, but you're boiling away oxygen from the inside of the jelly jar. And when the oxygen escapes, and then we take out the jar and we let the lid seal and form a vacuum seal, you then have a jar that has no oxygen in it. And there are a lot of microbes that require oxygen to grow. Mold does as well. And so by taking away the oxygen, you make it basically impossible for a whole lot of microbes to grow. So that's another function of. All right, Anna, take it away.
Great, I will. I just want to pause again for questions on any of the sciencey part. We'll see the kind of application of those principles here, but I want to make sure that everyone feels good about the basics of it before we move on. Any questions? Okay, pipe up as we're going. But what we wanted to do is choose a recipe this is actually, as Jessica mentioned, it's really simple, like a great kind of first jelly to try to make because it only uses 4 ingredients. So this is wine jelly. The next slide has our little diagram of the ingredients. So it's just the 4. It's just red wine, lemon juice, powdered pectin, and granulated sugar. So just to talk a little bit about each of those, this is, use whatever dry red wine you have. They'll all have a pH and sugar content that are pretty similar. And so this is a really great use if you're one of these people like I am who can drink a glass of wine, but maybe not an entire bottle, and then you end up with all these half bottles. So this is a great use of it. The lemon juice, one comment about the lemon juice to keep in mind is the lemon juice is playing 2 roles in this recipe. So first of all, it's doing a flavor thing. It's adding that bright citrusy flavor to it. But it's also, as Jessica mentioned, it's preserving it. It's an acid. And so it's lowering the pH of your overall product at the end. And hopefully it's lowering it below 4.6 so that we won't have microbes that want to colonize and want to eat it. So the acid level really does matter. And what that implies for our lemon juice is that we need to be getting a known acidity lemon juice, which is usually actually the only source that most of us have for that is store-bought lemon juice. So the ones that come in the little like lemon-shaped jars, that's what you want to do. I know it makes me sad as a person who has a lemon tree in my backyard, like, why can't I just use that? It's because we don't know the pH of our lemons. And it's actually a pretty wide range among lemons, like from Myers to others, that you can't be sure that you're getting the right acid level. So you do want to use store-bought lemon juice for this recipe. Packaged, oh, sorry, I want to go back.
Oh, sorry.
Talk about the pectin. So as Jessica mentioned, there we go. As Jessica mentioned, there are many different types of pectin, and this is another thing where you really can't be substituting. So the freezer pectin won't work in this case. You might also in the pectin aisle encounter liquid pectin, which is a great product for some other recipes. It's not a case where you can swap them out. They need to be heated for different amounts of time, and they need different amounts of acids and sugars to work. So you really do want to use a powdered pectin for this. And then the sugar, Jessica's already talked about a little. This is a lot of sugar, and we're relying on it for both preservative qualities and to help the pectin set. The pectin needs the acid and the sugar. So we can't be messing with the amount of sugar in this recipe. There are, as I think Jessica pointed out, other low sugar recipes that are designed for that and that use a low sugar pectin. So if that's your goal, search those out. There are a couple actually in the ball jar and the ball book and the other books that Jessica has pointed out. But let's keep going on the recipe. So the first thing that we'll do in making this jelly is to prepare our jars and lids. So those of you who have done this, who've made jams before, maybe you've gone through this process. This is where we're using heat to kill off whatever microbes might be around. So I'm reusing old jars, which is a totally fine practice. If you do that, you want to just check the rims of your old jars and make sure that there aren't any chips or irregularities, because you want to be able to create a good seal with that lid. So I'm putting those in my bath, and I'm also doing the same with my lids, they should be new lids. The lids are the one thing that you can't be reusing. You can reuse the jars, and also I think the next one will show our little bands. Those can be reused too. And so we're heating these all. They don't actually have to boil. They just have to get up to 180. That's enough to kill off whatever microbes might be on them. You'll notice about my setup here that I have them on a little, kind of in a cage that I'm able to lower into my pot. That's a really cool, very helpful thing to have. If you don't have one of those at home, you can create a water bath basically with just a big pot and put the jars in there. The one thing you want to make sure is that you're able to have water circulation between the bottom of your jar and the bottom of your pot. So this grate does that nicely, but there are other ways you can do it. Often people have like little grates or cooling racks or trivets that will fit in if you have that. Another thing you can do actually is the bands from your jars. You can put those on the bottom and then set your jars on top, and that'll allow some water circulation. If you do that, try to tie the bands together, because if they're loose, once the water starts boiling, they kind of go all over the place.
Yeah, you can use wire twist ties to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Denise. You can just kind of tie them together with twist ties and make a little, it's actually kind of a fun little arts crafts project, and just stick it in there and then place and I would use the small, not the wide mouth, the small ones, because then you get more, you're less likely to find a jar like falling into them. But yeah, so you're going to put them in, submerge them completely, and let them get to 180. And then I'm just going to leave them there. That's for a couple of reasons. One is I've just created this really sterile environment. This is going to be the cleanest spot in my kitchen probably at this point. So I'll just leave them there rather than take them out and expose them to everything else. And also because if my jars are staying in that hot water, they're going to be hot when I take them out and fill them with hot jelly. And that's preferable to filling my hot jelly into cold jars, because I have definitely done that and gotten the cracked jars. So keep them there, set them aside, you're good to go. And you're good to start your jelly prep, which is the most fun part and the easiest part. So you'll notice I'm using a stainless steel pot. You can use any non-reactive pot. So stay away from aluminum and like unceramic cast iron, and don't use copper. Not that any of us are really like grabbing for our copper pans, but use things that are not reactive. That'll make sure that you don't get kind of weird metallic flavors in your jelly. So I'm using stainless steel, and then all I have to do is pour in my wine, pour in my lemon juice. This is all off heat. And then the next step will be to add the pectin, still off heat. And then once I've dissolved the pectin, I'll bring it all to a boil. And then I'll add the sugar. And I'm going to add the sugar all at once and stir it as I go. And then once it comes back to a boil, I'm going to boil it for 2 minutes. Now set yourself a timer for this. This isn't like approximately 2 minutes, this is like 2 minutes, because we're wanting the pectin to do a very specific job, and we want to make sure it has its time to do that and not more. So what happens if you do under or over is you get not quite the set with your pectin that you would have been aiming for. We were just talking about this yesterday, that if you're not totally sure, if you forgot to set your timer and you're like, it's either 30 seconds or a minute to go, give it the extra time. It's better to overboil than to underboil, but it's better to boil exactly as you're supposed to if you can. So keep stirring that, boil it for 2 minutes, and then remove from heat. And then you can scrape off. This was actually a very, not very foamy jelly. Some other recipes you'll find you get a lot of kind of scummy foam on the top. You can just scrape that off. That is an aesthetic and not a food safety issue. So it's not like crucial that you do it, but it does make for a smoother jelly in the end and allows you to make that kind of like smooth top where you can like see yourself in the top. It's very satisfying. So that's a step you can do if that's something that you want. Next step is to fill your jars. So you're going to pull your jars from, they should be still pretty hot because this whole process was probably 5 minutes. So they're in your canning bath, already hot. Empty the water back into the bath and then pull them onto your counter. I like to put them on a dish towel to soak up anything else, but also so that I'm not putting like hot glass onto cold counter, etc. We use a funnel. That's probably the best investment I've made in my canning career, is one of these big funnels. They make things much cleaner and easier.
That and the jar lifter. The jar lifter is pretty crucial.
Oh, yeah, good point. I brought these out so that I could show them. So thank you.
Yeah.
This is a jar lifter. It's a specially designed tool that basically has handles, and then it has this nice kind of silicone coating that's really grippy. And it's shaped just to be able to lift a jar. And it's big enough so that you're separated, you're not getting steam burns for the most part. Good point, Denise. That and a funnel are the two kind of best bang for your buck if you're really starting to invest in creating jams. If you don't want to do that, you can also get tongs. If you have regular tongs at home, especially these are like 11 inches, you want to be able to get kind of far because this is always a steamy process. So you want your hands to be farther from it if you can. You'll notice what I did here. I think you can see I put rubber bands around the grippy part. That helps when you're trying to grip slippery, wet, hot glass. You want to do everything you can to be able to increase the friction there. So that's another option if you don't have the jar lifter at home.
I would just say, and this is the voice of experience, if you're using tongs to lift your hot jars that are full of hot water out of your hot water bath, be very careful the direction you tip them to empty that water, because the water will run down those tongs down your wrist, just so you know.
I have been there too.
Yeah, that happened once and I went and got the jar lifter.
Yeah, so there are many options. Just beware of how the safest ways to interact with your kitchen tools. But yeah, thank you for that prompt, Denise.
Yeah.
So that's what you'll be using to get your jars in and out. So we're filling the jars with our hot jars with our hot jelly mixture, which is going to be it's going to be quite liquid because it won't set until it's cooler. Oh, and the one other thing I wanted to note on that one is we're leaving a 1/4 inch headspace. So any jam or jelly or any actually processing recipe that has that doesn't have a headspace thing is not a one you want to look at. They should be very specific about how much headspace to leave. This recipe is a 1/4 headspace or 1/4 inch headspace. Headspace refers to the space between the top of your jelly and the rim of your jar. The reason we care about this and we want to be really accurate about it is we definitely need some space because we're going to put this back in that boiling water bath and its contents are going to expand and we need a space for them to expand into. The other thing that's going to happen as they expand is they're going to push the oxygen out of the jar. And that's the thing we want, because you remember what Jessica was saying is we're trying to remove oxygen so that we'll create an anoxic environment that's not friendly to the microbes that might otherwise eat it. So you want to make sure you have enough space for things to expand and not so much air there that it can't all be pushed out through the process of your processing. And so there are tools, speaking of all these kind of fun kitchen tools you can have, there are tools that are, I think they're just called headspace tools, and they have little notches at 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch.
I'm going to unspotlight you, and I have one, so I'm going to hold it up to the camera. So
Yeah.
this is what a headspace tool, official plastic one, looks like, and you can see the little notches. I don't think you can see up close. They're actually marked 1 inch, 3/4, 1/2, and 1/4 inch. So you just set them up. I have a water glass that I can do, but you just put them up against, well, you need to go this way. And that gives you the level you need to put your liquid at. Okay,
yeah,
signing
it's
off.
great. Yes, no, thank you, Denise. That's a great tool to have if you're, again, like making yourself your preservation kit. That's a great thing. But also, if you're trying to do the like lower budget version, you can use, as I have, just a tongue depressor with a little mark that I made at 1/4 inch. So I do that. Then I'm gonna go. Oops.
Sorry. Okay.
So then I'm going to go and just clean the rims of my jars. I want to make sure there's not any jelly residue or sugar that could interfere with the seal being made between my lid and my jar. Then I'm going to put on the lid, and I'm going to do what we call finger tightening with the band. So I'm going to tighten until I feel just a little bit of resistance, and then I'm going to stop. I'm not trying to crank it down. I actually want it loose enough so that the air can get out as I boil, because that's what we want. We want air to leave when we boil. So once we've done that, we're going to stick it back in that hot water bath using my fancy jar grabber tool. You'll notice I've distributed them evenly because I want them not to get unbalanced and tip. We want them to stay upright as they're going through this process. And then I'll just submerge them under, there should be another, we should have 1 inch on the top of water, like 1 inch of water above the tops of them, and boil them for 10 minutes. And again, this is a timer thing where you start your timer when it boils. So for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to turn off the heat and just let them sit and cool for 5 minutes where they are without moving them. And then after that's done, then I'm going to grab them back out, and I'm going to resist the temptation to tip them so the water comes off the top. I'm just going to let that water be. It'll evaporate on its own. I want to keep everything upright as I go because my jelly is hot and still liquid in there, and my seal hasn't formed yet. So if I tilt it, I risk kind of slopping that wet jelly up into the space between my lid and my jar. So I don't want to do that. I want to keep everything upright. And I'll put them again on the counter and just let them cool. The recipe, I think, says let them sit still for 24 hours. I think once your room temperature and your jelly is set and you have the seal, then you're good to move them. The seal I want to talk about. So I think maybe some folks are familiar with these ball jars. It's a great technology. It's so simple, but it's so great. The lids of these have a little tiny bit of concavity, I guess, on the top. So I can depress it with my finger. And so this is an unsealed jar. It's not vacuum sealed. So there's space in there for this to go up and down. After I've put this jar in the hot water and the air has been expelled, as it cools, the air doesn't come back in. It just actually pulls, as everything in the contents cool and contract, they pull down the lid. And so this will actually just depress like this. And it'll make that sound. And that's the most satisfying sound. If you're making jams and you're sitting there while they're cooling, they'll go like one by one, they'll make that little, and that's like a happy sound that means that yes, you've just gotten your vacuum seal. So that's also a thing to check for as you're like ready to transfer these from your counter to storage. Check to make sure that you've got that seal on each of these. If you can make this sound by pressing it down and up, then you don't have a seal. Once it's sealed, you shouldn't be able to make that sound. So check them. If you find some that didn't seal, you have a couple options. So one is that's perfectly good food. You just need to refrigerate it and use cold temperatures as your preservative rather than relying on the low oxygen, because you don't have low oxygen if you don't have a vacuum. The other option is to reprocess them, which is actually, it's kind of a lot of steps. So you actually have to unpack them, reheat the contents, reheat the jars, repack the jars, use a new lid, and then put them back for the same time processing, which sometimes, depending on what you're doing, it can also affect quality because now you're heating it again. So if you're doing something like a pickle or something where you wanted to preserve a like less cooked thing, you might not want to do that. You might just want to stick it in the fridge. But yeah, so those are the main things to consider as you're putting your stuff away. And then the last thing, before you put them in the pantry, as I already kind of mentioned with Jessica's freezer butter, label it. So just what it is and what the date is so that you know later. And tape is fine. You can get fancy labels too if you want to express yourself in that way. Most preserved things will last for up to a year in your pantry. They can, after that, it's usually not a food safety issue yet. You'll see a quality decline in terms of color and texture. But we do recommend using them within a year or giving them away within a year. Once you open them from your pantry, as you're pulling them from your pantry, again, check for that seal. It's safe to eat if it's still sealed. And then after you've opened it, refrigerate after opening. That was a lot. So I want to pause for a minute for any questions about anything on this process. Or for Jessica or Denise to add anything that I missed.
No, I think you did a great job.
Agreed.
Oh, so someone's asking, what does it taste like with the wine? I actually really like it. I'm a person who can consume wine in very small sips because I find I get overwhelmed by all of the complexity of flavor. And this kind of spreads it out and sweetens it up. So it tastes like a wine, but it's a very sweet, it's almost like what do they call those like sweetened wines?
Fortified wine.
Yeah, it's like a fortified wine. Even
or
more
sangria.
Yeah, it's actually it's a little like that, and it will maintain some of the flavors from the wine that you put in. So if you have a particular wine that you like, try that and see whether the flavors come through. You are cooking off quite a bit of the alcohol, so you're not getting drunk off this jelly.
So one other question came back up. Lynn had asked earlier about where to get pectin, and I listed the grocery store, the hardware store, Target, but I did say that pectin can be hard to come by right now because so many people are home and canning that jars are hard to come by, lids are hard to come by, pectin can be challenging to find. But mostly, Lynn, wherever you're looking for pectin, they should have that low sugar option available as well. You just might have to look a little hard for it. Amazon is also an option.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right, I'm gonna unspotlight Anna and go back to Jessica.
Oh, great. Okay.
You're up.
All right. So let's circle back around to the idea of food waste and how it interacts with food safety. So Anna has just finished by telling us that once you've opened your jam or jelly, you should refrigerate it and you should consume it within a few months. But these are all guidelines what we give you of the shelf life. And say you go to your fridge and you've opened your jar of jam or jelly and you find mold on it. And this has happened to me many times. And sometimes it comes quicker than you expect. Then you're faced with the idea, what do I do? Is this actually safe to consume? So some people talk about scraping off the top and you eat the bottom because you don't want to throw the whole thing out. That would be food waste, right? Well, okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. And let's go to the next. Okay, so this has actually been discussed on many, many levels, including by the former Prime Minister of the British government, who has also pointed this out as a food waste issue. I mean, in some of their negotiations around how to prevent food waste in the UK, this came up and it made headlines that actually Theresa May does that. She scrapes off the mold on her jelly jar and she eats what's below, and she says it's perfectly fine and everyone should be doing this. Next slide, please. If you live in California, you may or are a foodie, part of the foodie scene, and have heard about Squirrel and this cafe that's sort of built its reputation around jams. You may have heard this come up as a scandal that they are doing the same thing, but in a commercial context, like allowing mold to grow and then scraping it off and selling the jam below. And then the owner has come to her own defense, saying, well, hey, there's this mycologist who actually says that this is okay, that you can just get rid of the mold part and the stuff underneath is still safe to eat. So again, food safety versus throwing things away. I think I would like to hear from everyone else here first, though. You could go to the next slide. I think this is where we ask questions again.
Yeah, I'm going to launch the poll.
Launch the poll. Okay. So I want to know, of all of you here, many of you who have made jam, much less eaten it, what would you do? Anna, Denise, can you want to weigh in quickly, or would we?
I have been known to scrape mold from the top of my jam before. So
me too.
yeah, I hate to throw away that goodness below it.
I
Yeah,
know.
especially if you made this thing and you put in all your love
Yeah.
and your effort, it just feels like it's worth even
It
more.
does depend. It depends on how gnarly the mold looks, I have to say,
Yeah.
or how much of it there is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, a few more seconds.
A few more seconds, yeah. Just a few people who haven't responded. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to sort of talk through what what mold is in the official US recommendation. So actually we're sharing results. Thank you, Denise. It looks like we have a majority or plurality rather, who would actually just not eat the jam or jelly. But definitely split opinions and some people don't know. Okay, let's go on. Let's talk about this. So mold is a fungus. In case you didn't know, it is closely related to mushrooms and actually has sort of a similar structure. So if you were to zoom in on the micro level to look at the mold that's growing on your bread or on your jam, you would find that, so the part that you see from above is actually the fruiting body of the mold. Usually, so they have these like little stalk things, and that's what they create in order to spread their spores, which allow them to reproduce. So they'll release those spores into the air, and they're actually really tiny and fine, and sometimes you can inhale them. But down below, that visible part is a sort of a root-like structure. They're not actual roots. It's called mycelium, but that's a network that is actually most of the biology of the mold, and that is what extends through your bread or your jam or your fruits or whatever is being infested by mold. Yeah, and so you'll hear people on one side saying, look, mold is natural. There are a ton of foods that we create and eat that actually involve mold, and that is true. So mold is intrinsically involved in making salami, in making multiple kinds of cheese, blue cheeses, camemberts, etc., in making tempeh, in making sake. So that is absolutely true. Also, if you go and look up the official USDA regulation or recommendations, which we'll point you to later, they say that for a lot of hard foods, like if you have Parmesan, a wedge of Parmesan at home or a salami that's got the wrong kind of mold on it, all you have to do is cut that off, and usually the rest of the food is fine. So food waste wise, you can actually minimize that. So keep that in mind. Hard cheeses, hard salamis, firm fruits, you can cut off the mold. The rest of it should be safe to eat. But with jams and jellies, these are softer. And so a lot of what you're doing has to do with the softness of the medium, because the softer it is, the faster and further those mycelia can spread. And so the official USDA recommendation is that for jams and jellies, if you have any mold, you should probably toss it out. And again, this is partly also because we don't always know what kind of mold is on our jam or jelly. And there are a lot that are non-toxic, that aren't going to hurt you at all, really. There are some that do create toxins that can make you sick. And some of those can be really pretty scary toxins. Also, the spores that they're releasing can be an inhalation, can cause inhalation problems if you inhale them, health problems if you inhale them. Although, molds come in many different colors, and you can sort of like maybe try to figure out which kind of mold you have, I would not recommend that, doing that kind of microbial taxonomy at home. I would just say, if you want to be safe, this is what the USDA recommends in terms of food safety. And so this is just a snapshot of a PDF guide that the USDA has put out, and we can, again, when you fill out that survey at the end of our talk, this will be in the packet of stuff that we can email you as this, or you can just do a Google search on USDA recommendations around mold, and they'll give you the whole background as to why they make their recommendations and what you should do with different foodstuffs. Okay, so this sounds very depressing, right? It still sounds like a dichotomy between being safe and being safe for the earth, right? Like, and reducing food waste, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? Why don't we talk about how we can prevent the growth of mold on jams and jellies to begin with? That just makes everyone happy. Then you get all of your jam and jelly, and none of it goes to the microbes. So the first step is, if you're making jams and jellies at home. Okay, so we have actually, let me just, because this, Lynn says, It's okay to scrape off the mold of homemade, but if bought, no. Okay, so the USDA recommendations are for any jam and jelly, whether you've bought them or you've made them at home. The story is the same. If there's mold on it, there's no way we can be sure that it's safe. So the recommendation is to throw it away. If you make your own personal decision to scrape off the top and to eat what's below, I just want you to know that there's a risk that it's not safe, right? And that is your decision to make. I hope that helped clarify things. There isn't really a difference between homemade and store-bought in terms of safety, except that like store-bought ones follow, like there are quite a few more regulations they have to follow. But then again, if you're following the MFP recipes, you're basically as safe as the store-bought ones. So following on that, step one, actually, to prevent microbial contamination of your foods and of your jams and jellies, and to prevent losing them to microbes, is to follow our recipes and to do all the processing step by step that Anna explained, and that'll go a long way to winning the battle against microbes. And then whether they're yours or whether you bought them in the store, eat them promptly. So keep track of what's in your fridge. As we keep bringing up, just being a little conscientious about what food you have on hand, and eating it before it goes bad is another major step you can take. Here's one specific for jams and jellies, and it's because we're often tempted to, like, oh, you just spread butter on your bread, and maybe you want to use the same knife and go into your jam jar and use that. Don't do that. Please don't double dip. If you are going to put any spoons or knives into your jam jar, make sure that they're clean, please, because every time you put something not clean into your jam jar, you are essentially opening the door to bringing in new microbes that are then going to take up residence and may mold your jam. So use clean utensils. And then also, if you see weird stuff forming on your jar, but you're not sure it's mold, it might not be mold, and you might not actually have to throw it out. For instance, if you made your own jelly and you didn't scrape the foam off, and then a half year later you go back to your jar, it was on your shelf, you open it up and you're like, what is this funky stuff that's on the top of my jelly? Maybe it's just the foam that you left there, or I've seen sugar crystals grow on mold. So if you ever have questions about what's mold and what's not, if you're ever in this dilemma of like, how do I not waste too much food, but how do I also be safe about what I'm feeding myself and my family, get in touch with the MFPs. So that's what we're here for, is to talk you through those things. You can send us a photo of your food, and we'll help you with some evidence-based recommendations. And I think that brings us to the last slide, oh yeah, so here's time for questions. And actually, maybe you go to the next slide, Denise, that has ways to get in touch with us. You can find us on our website. We have a little contact us form, or you can email us directly at smsfpreservers, so that's San Mateo, San Francisco preservers @ucanr.edu. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or sign up for our email list, and our contact list is there, our contact info is there. And when you fill out our survey, which I think Denise can put the link in the chat right now, right?
I can.
Yeah,
it's also,
make sure that
this
you
is a
chat to
live,
everybody.
yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah.
I think I have to stop sharing to do that because I have to get to it.
Yeah.
I'll pause.
But anyway, so that will also, at the bottom, there's an option to sign up for our email list, and that's a good way to keep in touch. And so in the last few minutes, we have time for more questions. Let's see.
Sorry, I'm pulling up where the link was.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and if you missed that survey and you guys still want to come back and get in touch with us, really just, you can and you forget all of what we're showing you here, just do a Google search for Master Food Preservers San Mateo, San Francisco, and you come up with our website and the contact us form, and ask us any questions you want to.
Okay, here we go. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, I'm seeing a question in our chat.
Mm-hmm.
Any upcoming trainings to become a master food preserver?
This is the eternal question, especially with this mandatory, so all of our activities are still required to be remote. And for the time being, we haven't come up with a plan as to how to conduct trainings remotely. It's difficult because a lot of our trainings involve hands-on work with like the specialized equipment and looking over each other's shoulders and stuff. We have been talking about doing another class. We just aren't sure how. But so the best way to do this, yeah, I mean, so is to sign up for our email list, and absolutely as soon as we figure out how to do a training when we're next able to, we will be advertising it on that email list. Yeah.
Yeah, we love having like more passionate, excited people. We're a pretty small crew right now, so the more people who are interested in this and want to get trained and want to help share all of this stuff, the better.
Yeah. Let's see.
So the link is in there for the survey.
And that was a link posted by Denise, and it looks as though, so there are 2 surveys. There's one for the master food preservers, which is the one that Denise just posted. And that's forms.gle. And then it looks like there's also a
Rethink Waste, yeah.
surveys. You should take both. Oh, and someone's going to try to tackle the food fire. I'm excited. Okay. So it looks like we don't have any more questions, huh?
Yeah, I think you guys did such a great job explaining everything. Everybody's got it.
So we should, I mean, I wonder if we can, I just hope that everyone's had time to get to that survey. You know what? Well, we'll check out the number of responses that we have, and it may be actually, there's no reason I can't actually put the link to the survey on our website. I may do that just in case, you know, just specifically for people who have attended a workshop. If you miss it right now, put it on our website. We'll link
and Rethink Waste might, since they handle the registration, maybe Rethink Waste could also send out the survey to the list of people that registered.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yeah, we can help you email the survey link, the Master Food Preservers survey, and then also the Rethink Waste link as well. So we'll have all of that.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica and Anna and Denise, for preparing this entire workshop. It was so informative and very detailed. So I really appreciate all of that. I think, yeah, we don't seem to have any more questions. So yeah, just thank you so much for everyone for joining us. We do have some other events going on as well for Rethink Recycling Day. The link to our other events have been posted in the chat as well. So go check those out. It's not too late to sign up for those as well. Yeah, just thank you so much and have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks, Shirley, again for hosting us.